Welcome to the sixth and last module in the Surviving and Thriving as a New Leader series. We hope that since the last module, you've had an opportunity to put some change leadership principles into practice, and that you've had some good conversations with colleagues about the changes taking place in your organization. In this module, we'll explore what it means to engage your team and share some strategies for strengthening engagement by developing your team's knowledge and skills, making collaborative decisions, and building a strong team identity. Just like in the last module, you'll hear from other leaders and providers who will share their perspectives on these topics, and we'll leave you with a few things to explore and pay attention to between now and the next module. So let's get started. You may remember from earlier modules that employee engagement is defined as the extent to which employees are passionate about their work and committed to the organization. When employees feel engaged, they tend to persevere in the face of challenges, proactively take action rather than waiting to be asked, and anticipate and adapt to change. What we know about engagement is that direct supervisors have the single greatest impact on the engagement of those who report to them. That means that your team's engagement depends heavily on the choices you make, the behavior you exhibit, and the relationships you build with them. In particular, leaders foster team engagement when they develop the skills and knowledge of their team members, often through things like delegation, coaching, and knowledge management, find opportunities to make decisions collaboratively with their team, and foster a team identity where everyone feels valued for their unique contribution. Let's look at ways that you can do each of these. Many leaders shy away from delegating tasks because they don't want to add to their team's already busy workload, or because it's often just easier to do something ourselves. What we sometimes lose sight of, though, is that delegation provides a valuable opportunity for others to develop skills and knowledge. When you don't delegate, your team misses out on these opportunities. We encourage you to consider delegating tasks that will help team members learn more about the work, the department, or the organization, and to build relationships and confidence outside their regular daily activities. The tricky thing is there's not one right approach. Every person and every situation is different. Here's one tool to help you identify the most effective approach for a given situation. When we think about taking on a given task, we can categorize ourselves on two dimensions. One is our level of interest in the task, or our will, and the other is our level of skill, or our ability to do the task. When put together, these dimensions create a 4-box matrix that can help leaders tailor their delegation approach to fit the person and the situation. Imagine that one of your team members has a lot of experience working in Microsoft Excel and loves doing it. On this particular task, we put this person in quadrant 1. They have high skill and high will. Then imagine that you have another team member who hasn't used spreadsheets much, but is very interested in learning about it. On that same task, we'd put that person in quadrant 3. They have low skill, but high will. Research shows that when an employee is in quadrant 1 on a specific task, high in both skill and will, a leader can delegate on a deeper level by sharing the end goal and empowering the employee to decide on the best way to reach the goal. For the first employee in our example, this would likely be the right delegation approach to use. When an employee is in quadrant 4 on a specific task, but needs to get more comfortable doing it, low in both skill and will, leaders need to delegate very differently by providing much more direction and encouragement. Employees in quadrant 2 on a given task, high in skill but low in will, tend to need frequent encouragement but less direction. Employees like the second person in our example, low in skill and high in will, or quadrant 3, won't need encouragement as often, but will likely require more direction.
Delegating is something that I still sometimes struggle with. I'm just so accustomed to saying, okay, I can do this and be done with it. I look at delegating as an opportunity to learn or an opportunity to teach. In delegating something, I try to understand why I need to delegate that, why this needs to be delegated to this particular person. And not just because I don't want to do it or I've got to do something else and you do this. There are times when there is something that needs to be done in one department, but I will delegate it to somebody in another department. For example, if I have something that I manage a hospital, a nursing home, and a rural health clinic. If there is something that could possibly benefit the nurses in the clinic, I may delegate the research or whatever to the chief nursing officer in the hospital. The reason for that is it pulls those two together, because in delegating that to her, she's going to need to go back to the clinic and work with them, and it pulls those two departments together. It allows her to work with someone that she probably doesn't work with very often, because the clinic is in another building on the campus, but it's another building. And it allows her to take charge and do something that she probably wouldn't have thought of doing. And it has worked out well when I've done that. It takes thinking. Sometimes it's just standard.
Coaching can be paired with delegation or can stand on its own as a strategy for developing employees. Coaching isn't the same as training. It's not necessarily about giving people the right answers, especially when they're already highly skilled on a particular task. Ultimately, the goal of coaching is to increase others' capacity to think through a situation and decide on a course of action. It's really about helping employees become more effective and independent in their roles. Coaching looks different in different situations. As the skill-will matrix has shown us, a more directive coaching style is best suited to those situations when skill is low, when an employee doesn't have the knowledge or skills needed to address the situation at hand. But when you feel an employee has the skills to address the situation at hand, a more empowered approach to coaching can have a major impact on their growth and development. What does an empowered approach look like? Primarily, it involves asking questions and being a good listener. Rather than giving direction, you can work to help the employee shape a plan themselves. So if you've delegated a task to an employee who has the skills and knowledge needed to complete it successfully, you might start the coaching process by asking things like, what would you like to have happen? How will you know you've been successful? How would you like to proceed? As things progress, you might check in to ask how things are going, what progress has been made, what's working well, and what's working not so well. If problems come up, it can be hard not to automatically offer suggestions. You might help them think things through by asking things like, what options have you considered? What has worked for you already? And how could you do more of that? There's a comprehensive list of coaching questions for you to pick from in the resource guide for this series. If you've never had a conversation like this with your employees, you might initially encounter resistance because they're expecting you to give them the right answer. But if you do it consistently over time in the right circumstances, you'll see your employees lead into this more collaborative way of problem solving, and you'll build their skills and confidence in the process.
Sometimes I think that employees don't necessarily see that they have growth potential, and being able to kind of recognize those things, and then even just kind of throwing it out there to them and being like, no, I think you can do this. And I really would like it if you could try. They usually aren't super resistant. You know, I mean, there's different moments where people are hesitant. I mean, one employee is like, I just don't really like speaking in front of a lot of people. You know, I'm like, okay, well, what's the best way to get through that? Keep trying, right? And do it again and do it again. And you'll find that it becomes easier over time.
You don't have to be the only person responsible for developing your team. There's likely a wealth of knowledge and experience represented among your team members, so don't forget to ask employees to teach and develop each other. The most experienced employees likely have a lot to share with newer employees, but newer employees may also have a lot to teach the more experienced employees. When you create an environment that encourages continuous sharing and learning from each other, you build the entire team's collective knowledge. And as a side benefit, relationships between team members grow even stronger in the process.
We all started new. None of us came into the organization with a full breadth of experience. We're all still learning. And if you leave yourself open to learning the rest of your life, you will be the best leader that you can be, because you will take it all in, absorb it, and be able to offer what your life experience has brought to the situation. But with equity and diversity and inclusivity in particular, you owe it to yourself to learn as much as you can. Get in there and understand, especially if it's not familiar territory to you. But there's a history of racism and a history of systemic ways to keep people from access to not only healthcare, but access to financial stability. Get in there and understand that, absorb it, embrace it, and use your leadership to make those things known, help others learn.
Once you get to that point where you want to be a leader, then you start doing your research, you start studying, you find someone to mentor with. Find someone that you think that's a good leader, a good team person, a good manager to help you. I've had so many people throughout the time that I've been in leadership and management. I've had nursing assistants, I've had licensed practical nurses, I've had supervisors, I've had physicians. And I learned from them. Some things, nope, don't want to do that. Other things, that's great. So you learn as you go, and you'll do just fine. Don't think it's impossible. It's possible.
Another important factor in engagement is having team members participate in making decisions. This doesn't mean that you should make group decisions in every situation, but it does mean that it's important for you to find opportunities to make decisions collaboratively with your team when the situation is right. But when is the situation right? There are no hard and fast rules, but here are a few guidelines. Making a decision as a group can be a good option when you're making a complex decision that can benefit from a variety of perspectives, when buy-in from your team is particularly important, when participating in the decision presents an opportunity for your team to learn and grow, and when you have time to meet with the team, get their input, and work through conflicting opinions. When you're leading a group through the decision-making process, it's important to be very clear up front about how their input will be used. You'll need to let the group know where the responsibility for making the final decision ultimately lies. Do you plan to consider their input but make the final decision yourself? Will you be gathering their input and passing it on to someone else who will make the final decision? Will the group have the ultimate say on the final decision? And if so, will it be made through a vote, or is the goal to have complete consensus on the decision? Once you've provided clarity on how the decision will be made, you can get to work leading the team through the decision-making process. Here are a few additional tips for leading a group through collaborative decisions. Create an environment where all group members have equal input and no one member's position carries more weight than others. Provide a safe space for group members to share their thoughts. All members should feel respected even when others disagree with them. Withhold your own judgment. If an idea is shared that you instinctively disagree with, ask clarifying questions to understand the other person's position better. And use appreciative inquiry with your team. Appreciative inquiry is a process for helping a group identify a change they'd like to make and decide how best to work toward that change. For more information about appreciative inquiry, check the resource guide for this series. The last factor in engagement that we'll talk about in this module is building a strong sense of team identity. When individuals on a team have a common vision for why they exist, feel a sense of belonging and being valued for their contributions to the team, they tend to be more engaged. Here are a few strategies for building a strong team identity. First, lead a discussion with your team to develop a shared understanding of the team's purpose for being. You might ask questions like, why does our team exist? What would happen if we didn't exist? What benefit do we bring to patients, colleagues, the organization, and our community? And what does success look like for our team? And you might even consider building a team mission statement from the ideas that come out of this discussion. You could have team members complete a personality assessment like DISC, StrengthsFinder, or Core Strengths, and have an external person facilitate a team discussion about team members' values and strengths. These kinds of discussions can help team members learn more about people who might look at the world differently than they do, and build stronger relationships in the process. And celebrate team successes on a regular basis. Express appreciation for each person's unique contribution to a given success, and encourage others to do the same.
That feeling of belonging comes from developing and embedding in your organization the culture that fosters that feeling. If you develop that culture to include that people feel valued when they come to work, that their opinions matter, their ideas matter, that the ideas don't just come from the top, they come from the grassroots up, from the sides in, from the top down, and that every idea is a good idea and valued. People just want to feel valued, and you have to set up a culture where people feel valued.
Well, we've reached the end of this module and the end of this series. Through the 6 modules in this series, we covered a lot of ground. We looked at the role of a leader and shared strategies for building organizational awareness in your role. We talked about managing performance and the importance of communication and building strong relationships. We shared strategies for managing conflict and having difficult conversations. We walked through the change process and explored ways for leaders to support themselves and others along the way. And of course, in this module, we looked at things that leaders can do to engage team members by helping them grow and feel a sense of belonging. We hope this series has given you a few nuggets to help you inspire and guide your team in the important work they do. We encourage you to reflect on these questions on your own or discuss them with your colleagues. Do you delegate as often as you'd like? If not, why is this? How might you change the way you think about delegation to give your team members more opportunities to grow and develop? Think of a time when someone delegated something to you. Where would you place yourself on the skill-will matrix on that specific task? Was the task delegated to you in a way that was a good fit for where you were on the matrix? What was the outcome, and what did you learn in the process? Think of a coach who had an impact on your life. It could be someone who helped you with sports, academics, or other activities in your personal or professional life. What did they do that made them a good coach? And how can you bring similar value to your coaching relationships at work? What decisions could you get your team more involved in? How might you use their input, and how might you best lead the team through the process? And how often do you celebrate successes with your team? If heavy workloads make it hard to celebrate, are there other ways to recognize success that don't take as much time? And here are some things you might consider doing to further develop your understanding of the topics in this module. Spend some time identifying opportunities to delegate tasks that will help each of your team members grow and develop. Use the skill-will matrix to determine which quadrant each person might be in on a given task, and plan your approach to delegation accordingly. Use the coaching conversation planner in the resource guide to plan and carry out a coaching conversation with one or more of your team members. Identify opportunities for your team members to teach each other what they know. Engage the entire team in the planning process. Find a mentor inside or outside your organization who might be willing to share what they know about leadership with you. Ask them how they approach the various topics covered in this program, and ask them to help you continue your development as a leader. Lead your team in a discussion about the team's purpose, using the suggested questions in this module. And find ways to celebrate team successes. Ask your team for input about ways the team might recognize success in a meaningful way. For more tools and resources, check out the resource guide for this series, as well as the National Rural Health Resource Center's website. There's a leadership collection on the site full of great tools and information. And we at the National Rural Health Resource Center are always available to answer questions or provide additional resources. Please contact us anytime for further assistance. We thank you for joining us throughout this series, and we wish you the best as you continue your important work in rural health.